Ruthless Compassion is a podcast about how you can turn your emotional shit into fertilizer for success and see your darkest moments as opportunities to transform into a powerful kindness warrior. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review wherever you listen. Welcome, Michael Tennant, to the Ruthless Compassion podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Marcia.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I would love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners, tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do, and maybe why you do it.
Cool. My name is Michael Tennant. I'm the founder and CEO of Curiosity Lab. We exist to make empathy easy to learn and to teach and to practice. I'm the creator of Actually Curious, which is a conversation game that helps to teach empathy skills. It's a system of questions that allow you to pick the levels that make sense for your group to build greater connection and trust before getting into necessary but sometimes difficult topics. I'm also the author of The Power of Empathy, which is a 30-day guide to strengthening empathy in yourself and using it towards bringing about your purpose. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm very happy to have you. It's a great topic. I'm wondering how you got into doing this kind of work.
Yeah, I'd say there were two major moments that got me into this work. The first was between 2016 and 2018. I left corporate America. I left my job as an executive at a major advertising firm. I created my own company, which was based around helping people and organizations to tell stories through their values. And when we started to use our own strategy on ourselves, we created a conversation game with the purpose of gamifying trust building. So that's the original Actually Curious. It has 4 levels that allow you to just buy that one deck and you can start light and you can level up into important topics like mental health, like gentrification, like sadly, suicide, or just the reality, depending on how much you've worked with the question. And so that was my initial kind of steps into empathy, and I didn't really know where it was going to go. In 2019, actually, as the business of Curiosity Lab as a marketing company was struggling, and I moved into a job in public health as the chief marketing officer of a nonprofit in public health. Tragedy hit my family. We lost 2 of my older brothers, July and October of 2019. And through that experience, what ended up happening is it was a full stop. I realized that I'd been escaping my emotions through work, through romantic partnerships, through substance use and abuse, but highly functional. I was an executive. No one knew what I was working through and how I was numbing. And I realized when I lost my first brother, who was really the anchor to so much of my self knowing and love and joy, I realized that if I continue escaping through those toxic coping mechanisms, that my life would probably be shortened as well.
Wow, that's a lot. I'm so sorry to hear about your brothers.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So I guess that was your wake up moment.
So that was the wake up moment. And, it was a very challenging, I'd say, process. I had a bereavement leave that gave me some of that space to really check in. And you see, I'd gone to therapy. I was in a men's group. I had, meditated on and off, maybe had healthy eating, maybe not. Didn't really have a great relationship with boundaries, which I think would oftentimes trigger a lot of those things. But I was able to almost dogmatically put all of those pieces together. And when I had the second loss, I would say I had what I've described as a productive trauma response. My awareness was a lot more open. I had sensed that, my relationship with that employer wasn't going well after that first bereavement leave. And I almost detected what would happen where I got let go. I would say that's where I really started to anchor in my values as a way of remaining steady, because to lose a job, but also to show up now for my family. My parents are still alive. So 2 parents who are grieving their lost boys, 8 nieces and nephews in total who were grieving their fathers, let alone, and I'll say I'm much more aware now. I was grieving very heavily. And even then, even though I thought I was attuning to everyone, even then I was so much grieving my own broken heart that there was a lot that I missed. But through that all actually happening before the pandemic happened, I would say I was already practicing the skill sets that would later unfold in my book. What predates the book is just organically getting invited to speak about how I was using skills that I learned through that grieving to stay focused on my purpose, even as the pandemic hit, and then to even turn my grief and the tools that I learned to cope with it into ways that individuals could feel more full and more resilient. But actually, the key thing that I was attuning to was an awareness that the difficult emotions that I didn't know how to deal with when I lost my brother Chris, most of us don't know how to deal with. Even when we're trained, there's always this little safety valve that sometimes like can get us out through whatever our escape is, out of that really, really challenging situation. And that shows up when we are pursuing change in groups, in workplaces. At the time when I started getting asked to speak about this a lot, it was, how are we dealing with remote work? How are we dealing with confronting more head on? There was a lot of agency in 2020 and 2021 to take on issues of diversity, other issues of inequity in the workplace. How could we equip those individuals, both those who are advocating and those who may face, shame or anger or sadness when confronting privilege? If we can equip everyone with more skill sets to be with those emotions and to not escape, then okay, now we take this grief and this groundedness that comes from working through that grief and we make it actionable in a myriad of situations.
So do you feel like people, when they experience traumatic things, they kind of can go in one of maybe a few directions, but like I've seen kind of one direction, which is to shut down more and to become kind of numb and disconnected. And another I've seen is to really wake up, in a sense, to open their heart and to get deeper and more compassionate and to see how they are connected with others. So have you seen that kind of divergent reaction to trauma and hurt?
Well, I mean, I love that you both have described these like, opposite directions, but you also made note of a myriad of directions.
Yeah.
Um, the reason I pause and just like highlight that or double highlight that is I think you may go in one direction where you've responded with resilience and groundedness and empathy for yourself and empathy for those, and on the other side you really feel like, okay, I've both learned and grown in compassion, but that may not go the same way the next time. Or what I think a lot of people, therapists like yourself, educators like many of your listeners, parents, anyone, many of us have been dealing with extended need to tap into that ability to show up for yourself and everyone else. And I think many people are feeling burnt out. And so you do see even those who typically have shown up and grown through that trauma or grown through that challenge exhibiting more of those characteristics of those who feel the need to protect themselves, either lightly or more so. But I think there's something beautiful in recognizing that wave, seeing it in ourselves, potentially having compassion for ourselves, doing that so much that we develop, a skill set to show up there more often than not, or to at least notice, label, seek support, self support when we need to regain that fullness. But I think that that compassion of seeing that wave actually opens up our compassion for those who are fully closed off. And I guess that was one of like the biggest goals is like, okay, well, if I'm not feeling full enough to show up in any of these situations, micro or maybe it's bigger, then I lose already. So I have to equip and I have to make sure that my allies, they have everything that I've learned to equip themselves so that they can show up. But hopefully there's more of us who are agitating that enough and stretching and growing enough that we can walk into rooms where, quite frankly, we're terrified. We know that the protectiveness actually shows up as hate. I would say that would be the extreme, right? But if no one is willing to go into that room with some sort of plan to affect it, then where's our hope?
That's amazing. That's a really amazing statement. Yeah. I don't even have a comment to that. It's just an amazing statement. Yeah.
I feel sadness when I think about it because, one thing I say when I'm teaching the empathy skills is my model is called the 5 phases of empathy, right? And it starts at giving individuals a shared lexicon. Is that okay if I dive
Yep.
into that? Okay.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
starts at giving individuals a shared lexicon around empathy. And then it actually takes people deeper into something that was really core to my healing, which is somatic empathy or somatic experiencing, the natural ability that we may have more or less, but we all have some ability to sense the emotions that are around us in the room, in each other, in the qualities of artwork and convey that way as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was so important to my healing. And then when I learned that was one of the 3 types of empathy and that we don't really practice it that much, I made it the base of the model, in which if we can strengthen that type of empathy, we can then be more attuned to what's happening in us. Oh wow, I feel the markers that I've come to become familiar with that remind me of shame or anger or sadness. I feel those markers physically. Most of us can't do that. But I've learned that when you actually just create controls that allow you to feel a particular emotion or remember feeling that particular emotion, then you can actually build the map that you have in your body, right? And then because you're more attuned to yourself, you actually are almost like, especially your loved ones, and you're looking and you're seeing, like, okay, that resonates with me because I react to fear in that way, or maybe I might close myself off, or maybe I might back away, or maybe I might close my arms. Because you notice it in yourself and you have that compassion for yourself, you notice it more in others. And when you can add that to your mix, then you actually start to strengthen your awareness and your empathy in that way. The second phase of empathy, which is the importance of intention, that is knowing your values, knowing your purpose, and being able to use that as a tool. It's not just for most of us enough to just notice those emotions. We're going to need to do something with it, right? But so if we have our values and we can use that as a tool to help process, okay, I feel this, I've labeled it, I'm slowing down, I know I'm not going to act right away. Maybe it's something that is elongated. Maybe it's a negotiation. Maybe it is a family member that you have a strained relationship with. You're going to see that person and you want to show up in your integrity. So maybe you bring your values plus your awareness of how it feels to be around that person, and you journal about it. You practice almost before you go. So you have some reps in place, right? That works at work. Essentially, what I say is you're choosing phase 3, channeling your purpose. You're choosing to become more aware of your emotions, your ability to act within your integrity, and now how you might direct that. Are you going to direct that towards things that you can affect or that you can't affect? Part of that is, say, our thoughts, even. I notice that I speak this way in challenging times, or I notice that I feel this way when others are directing their attention towards the gossip or towards what have you. All the way out to, hey, is this the news? Is the news affecting me emotionally such that I'm showing up agitated towards my loved ones or towards my coworker? I used to gossip at work a little bit. I actually noticed that it took away from me feeling good, and I actually distracted me from more of the things that I could control, right? So just how do we use those 2 skill sets to build that muscle of, hey, where's my attention going? Because if my attention is going towards my intention, then I'm more impactful. I'm delivering towards that. So I noticed that I just dove way into the model.
That's
And
okay. It's very interesting. You said there were 5 phases, right?
yeah, I just wanted to make sure I still had permission to keep going and
Yeah,
if you have
yeah.
questions. Sure. So phase 4 is from empathy to impact. So actually, a friend of mine in a mini workshop, because we've been experimenting with how to take these 5 phases of empathy and to deploy it tactically into specific subject matter areas. So we work on empathy and money, or empathy in finance and the habits that we developed. And he played it back. It's always really nice to hear people play back and to teach you something about your own model. But he was like, oh, I noticed that first three phases are really internal focused. What do I feel? What do I do with it? Where might I need to build more skill at directing that knowledge and that awareness that I have? And what are the benefits of it? Phase four now brings in our ecosystem. So when I talk about an ecosystem, I always double back down onto ourself first, because actually one of the biggest things I learned when I was healing and learning how to incorporate more often than not more positive coping mechanisms, and did that long enough. I just mentioned like gossiping in the past. One of the biggest ahas was I was like, when I realized, wow, so much of my unhappiness I labeled as being a part of work, but really so much of it was my social connections, how I was choosing to cope, whom I was commiserating with, my lack of purpose was so much of it. But not until I'd spent enough time working did I realize that like it was my inner narrative and the skills that I had. So I always double back down when I talk about ecosystem on, hey, how are we talking to ourselves? What boundaries do we have in place with ourselves, right? Do we believe we deserve to say no? Do we believe that we deserve rest? Because oftentimes we can direct it out. But then, okay, now that we're practicing that, is our job aligned with our purpose? Is our relationship with the individuals that we are responsible for or that we report to and have that kind of dynamic, or even clients, right? Is my relationship with this in alignment with my integrity? Do I feel good as I'm doing it? The commitments that I've made to family, are those healthy? So from empathy to impact then says, hey, when you look at all the places where you share your energy and you work through the three phases, how do I feel? What are my values in this space? Am I adding value? Is it making me feel better? Is it taking away? And you can audit that space. Then emerges where you might need to speak up, where you might need to incorporate new boundaries, or where you might need to have a hard conversation with yourself and take some of your time or your energy back. And when you can do that, phase five really opens up, which is living with abundance. Look, to even get through, and I think this is like the biggest challenge is my book, The Power of Empathy, it's work. It's a 30-day guide and it's activities, and it uses relatable stories so that you can drop in, and then mixes in the science. So especially those who are, more analytically minded and need to really be grounded in the science, then they're supported as well, and gets you practicing them right away. But if you're really diving in, then you're going to feel some things. You're going to access some stories and memories and narratives with a greater awareness than you ever have. But again, I love how we talked about agitating that, expanding your skill set, and being able to show up when it's hard, even in rooms where you don't feel safe, and to be a leader in those spaces. That's one example. But another example might be overcoming the block that you have around a life change moment that you're going through. Many are working through their second or their third act right now. And as you're doing that hard work of assessing your skill sets, your strengths, tilling, I like to call it tilling, looking at the things that weren't going well or didn't feel so good, starting to notice, oh, wow, I actually have this opportunity to take all that was good, get rid of all that was bad, and emerge into a new version of my life, my being. That's living with abundance. Right. And it's not easy until it gets easy. And then those who have gone through the five phases and have seen, oh, wow, when I learn how to identify places where I can grow in my emotional proficiency, my ability to recognize, be with, and actually grow through that emotional experience, I'm a better person on that other side. Then you almost want to find that next area of work as well.
Yes, that's right. Because, if you're not growing, you're not living, right? You're just stagnating. So you have to keep growing. But I wanted to ask you, because you use the word abundance. And I think these days, especially in our era of social media, where everyone is flashing their fancy lifestyles and their fancy possessions, we are mistaking abundance for having a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And can you speak to that? Can you speak to your version of abundance? Because I don't have a feeling that you're talking about having lots of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I would say my version of abundance is happiness. It is a happiness that is not fleeting or ephemeral or superficial. And I have achieved material abundance as well as needing to look at my more holistic abundance. As an entrepreneur, I think when I have interviews these days, there's something that I have to reckon with, which is I am both the happiest I've ever been, but also possibly the most financially insecure that I've
Yeah.
ever been for the most extended period. And when speaking about abundance and knowing what many people have as an expectation of abundance and just really just wanting them to connect to the work as best as possible, I always have to reckon with, because I'm always checking in with my integrity, how to share both. So here's an attempt to try. I'll just lay out some of the facts for me. 4 years ago, I was a marketer. If we go back 7 years, I was an executive at one of the top advertising firms in the world. In that life, I had a lot of material abundance. I made hundreds of thousands of dollars, basically. And I left that world and I didn't actually know all the ways in which I was unhappy. I was disconnected from my family, had a lot of healing to work through from childhood, which just had me in a series of serial toxic relationships and pointing fingers outward and not realizing my own contributions. I was pretty unhappy.
Yeah.
Today, every day I wake up, even on the hard days, to do my job, which is a job that I created essentially, which is spreading empathy both in intellectual spaces, but in my superpower, which is through storytelling, which I've translated into consumer products that are just easy to connect to and that are fun and beautiful and all of these things and sold at museums around the world and all of that. One of my biggest values was freedom, and it's kind of been dispersed and kind of into other values, so I don't talk about it as much. But where I've gone down this journey where I've made hundreds of thousands of dollars that I could invest into this movement to spread empathy. I've been featured by the New York Times, by national television. I've gotten investments from Pharrell Williams, who is international pop star. He's now the creative director of Louis Vuitton, among just like a renaissance of things. He's also an empathy advocate as well.
Mhm.
But I've had to use these skill sets to navigate hardship as well. I say after the pandemic and return to work, and employers have shifted some of their focus away from DEI efforts, I've had to adapt my business. And I actually returned to the 5 phases of empathy. I've gone to the first 3 phases, the inward, and I've looked at that and I've realized, I married my best friend during this past 4 years. I had a beautiful baby girl. I was able to buy a home. I have assets. I have a book now that is published all around the world. This hurt was translated into something that's going to last forever and help individuals, educators, parents, DEI professionals, therapists, even, to give others who look like me and who don't really accessible ways to continue down their healing journey. To be able to do all of that and to make sure that I can still connect and provide for my family, even when it's challenging, is so much more abundant than those days when I worked in advertising and spent my days out of alignment with my integrity.
For sure. And, nothing wrong with working for advertising if that's what is, in your soul and heart. But if it's not, then you got to find what's right for you.
Absolutely.
And now let's pause for a quick word about my other podcast. Since I was a kid, I've loved watching movies. As a psychiatrist, I'm blown away by how film touches us at our core, deepens our self-knowledge, and can improve the human condition. I wanted to let listeners know that I've started a new podcast, called Real Mental with Dr. Marcia Sirota. I'm going to be talking with film and TV experts to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health on the big and small screen. Some recent films covered are Turning Red, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and Asteroid City. Please subscribe to Real Mental on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Well, there's some things that you talk about in your book, and one of them I really wanted to talk about with you because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years, which is about how to courageously confront. And I think that, we really struggle with confrontation with other people because we don't have a good model for doing it with empathy, with compassion, with integrity. So we either hold it in, hold it in, hold it in, and then we explode because we've been repressing our resentment or our frustration or, our unhappiness with a situation. And when we keep it under a lid, it's like anything, the lid blows off, or we leak passive aggressively, like that's another way that we avoid it, or we just avoid it altogether and we end up imploding and getting unwell mentally or physically because we can't, because we just feel like we don't deserve to, or it's bad, or people won't like us, or people will abandon us because we assume everyone's going to be unreasonable and rejecting when we express our needs or feelings. And so, I wanted to hear your particular take on this courageous confrontation, because personally, I feel that confrontation creates the possibility of authentic and deep relationships, because when we can negotiate in good faith, whether in personal or professional relationships, that's when we can build bridges and everyone feels seen and heard and gets, to find a way to get their needs met. So how do you envision courageously confronting through your model of empathy?
Yeah. Well, I really love all the ways that you touched on as well. The way I addressed it in the book, a lot of the book is directed inward. And I share an anecdote about a conversation with my mother that I had during the pandemic, in which I was actually running away from her. And I think the beautiful part is that I'm now able to notice when I'm running away. And sometimes I have to, because I just don't have it in me for that confrontation at that moment. But this time I was escaping, and I was also trying my best to use some of the tools to remain, and with whatever I was able to muster, because oftentimes when we feel danger, we're not all there cognitively, right? We've already gone physiologically into a flight state, or maybe it's a fight state, but our brains aren't operating the same way, right? And that's why we might fly off into an argument as well. But as I was backing away from her, a question emerged. And the question for her was, the attention that you're giving me at this moment and the way that you're pursuing me at this moment, even though I'm running away, do you wish that your parents had given you this kind of attention? And she didn't quite understand the question, and I didn't even really understand why I was asking that question. But I decided to reframe it in a more simple way. And I said, do you wish your parents loved you the way that you love me? And she fell back from her pursuing posture, and she thought for a moment and got soft. I could see her get visibly soft. And then she closed back up and she said, no, they loved me and they did the best that they could for me. But in that interaction, it taught me so much about myself, about my interactions with my mother when she's in that posture and when I feel like I need to protect myself. It taught me about wanting to be more curious about why she acts the way that she acts, and a little glimpse of maybe the trauma that she, or the longing or something that she wanted to give that she didn't receive, and then how hard it would be to really get her to be vulnerable enough to share that. That interaction taught me that if I'm vulnerable and I continue to work at finding more capacity to be soft when I'm afraid, that I might learn so much and I might be able to eventually unlock that in others. So when I said to bravely confront, I was speaking a lot towards just trying to give individuals a glimpse of what could be on the other side of being curious about pursuing that, even though it's painful, Because what shows up, your situation, my situation, it may be different. I just want to make an attempt through my anecdotes to show you, hey, if you are able to, I use the language agitate that. I may not have used that much when I wrote the book, but if you are able to agitate your edge of comfort in confrontation, you'll get better at it and you'll be able to have compassion for others who are bad at it. Yeah.
It's definitely a skill that bears practicing, because we have so much anxiety around it. And we've come from a place where so many people we tried to confront were unreasonable. And so we have this expectation of being abandoned or rejected or, shown to be a bad person if we confront. And so there's a lot of unlearning to do. And being vulnerable is hard too, right? It's hard to be vulnerable. There's a lot of messages from our society about, how you shouldn't be vulnerable. So it's
Like,
definitely a skill.
I think many of our heroes who have been able to bring about change are, or at least comfortable with confrontation. It's almost required for
Yeah,
growth. It's required for progress, is being willing to see something, see another path, and be willing to confront it.
for sure, for sure. Well, speaking of that, I wanted to ask you another question about your model. So you're talking also about how empathy can create social change. And, I'm thinking about how when we feel connected to one another, that's when we're motivated to go out there and do something, right? When we feel that we are part of it. When we feel disconnected, we are not motivated. But when we feel interconnected, we're motivated to go and roll up our sleeves and do something. So how does empathy, the way you see it, motivate us to engage in social change and positive social change?
Yeah. So the model in phase two, you would walk away with your purpose and your values. And if you're able to more often than not feel like your actions, your words, your thoughts are in alignment with your purpose and your values, you're going to feel better. And you can actually use it as a rubric to look at the community that you're in. Or actually, when I was very unhappy, I realized that I thought I was in community, but I was surrounding myself a lot of times with people who are enforcing or reinforcing my toxic coping mechanisms. So when I was out of alignment with my integrity, right? But I needed something to help me figure out what that even meant, right? It helped me to reassess community. Or in the United States, our Surgeon General put out a report on the epidemic of loneliness, right? A lot of times, like, it's intimidating to figure out what to do once you've identified, hey, I'm lonely. If you have your values and your purpose, you can then say, okay, you know what? I'm going to spend the afternoon looking at my values and brainstorming where I might find those individuals, or looking at, I have this hunch that there's some places that I go. There's like my shoulder. Now I'm aware of how emotions show up in my body, and this knot in my shoulder. I've been calling it something, but I'm connecting that it has something to do with stress or the emotions that I'm feeling over an extended time. Oh, I actually feel it triggered a little bit when I'm in this space. And I look at my values. I'm out of alignment with my values when I'm in this space, and I either need to confront, say something here to shift it, or confront with myself and remove myself, right? I guess I'm just playing back the model in practical terms. But once you have that community right, you actually see individuals coming to support your values and your purpose, or you realize, hey, I don't need to feel shame when I speak up in this environment because I'm safe here. I'm with individuals who know that when I do speak up and that I've taken this risk and they respect me enough, that there will be shifts here, or at least I know now that I should remove myself. So I think I both try to address that community is an amplifier of your happiness and your purpose, which for me is one and the same, but your purpose may be simple, right? It may just be, and this is what I hear in a lot of rooms, is that your purpose may just be to show up for your family on a daily basis. And when I say just, I just say that to make a delineation that if anyone is not trying to show up in rooms and talk to racists and to show them empathy and to use that empathy to teach empathy, and that you're very far from that, that's totally fine. Use this to feel good. Use this to support however it is that you want to show up and maximize your happiness and to use greater awareness of your purpose to do that. Then I want to support that. And I want to support your ability to show up when there's that hard conversation that's happening around an illness in the family, or someone who is working through anxiety or depression or grief in your extended family, in your chosen family, that you're just even a little bit better, or you have the exercises that can take you from one level of depth to the next level of depth that's right for you.
Yeah, I keep thinking about how, so many people these days are kind of apathetic, right? There's so much bad stuff going on in the world these days, and so few people go out and vote. So few people, get involved in their communities. They're lonely, but they feel disconnected, right? They feel disconnected from one another. And I wonder how they could get plugged in. They could find a way to feel that sense of connection, to feel that sense of urgency, to feel that their voice matters, that their actions make a difference, that they have agency, that if they say something or do something, it actually can lead to something better, both for themselves and those around them. I wonder how we can bridge that gap from that person sitting alone in their home, in their apartment, feeling alienated and isolated and disconnected, versus being out with others and feeling like they have a voice, they have a purpose.
Yeah. Well, I think if we want to affect individuals in our ecosystems, if you will, who we feel are suffering from apathy, or we just want to bring them along as allies, more selfishly, if we will,
Mhm.
then we have to start with having empathy for how and why they might be that way. I think there's no secret that probably the majority of people live in some version of apathy. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. You're not confronting as much there. You're able to direct your energy towards more individualized or perhaps more immediate and pressing, if we're speaking of individuals who are either going through emotional or financial or some other hardship and can only really bring their attention to a few places. It's hard to think more globally in that sense, whether that be in your community or larger. So I just think you first have to start with having empathy for why that apathy exists. Then, for the individuals who are passionate about affecting apathy, then it's really important to look at where you're going to be effective. It's important for two reasons. One, to find progress, you direct your attention towards places that you influence, but you really direct your attention and your actions towards what you control that affects what you influence. But you do that also so that you can show up for the marathon, so that you can support yourself, so that you can be resilient, so that you have less wasted energy. Yeah, I don't think that apathy is going away. If you have empathy for history, you have empathy for the momentum that you see, at least in the amplified world, the media world, then you have to realize that it is an uphill battle. And so if you take on this challenge like I have, and as you have, Marcia, and as many of your listeners, then you have to have both a realism for the challenge as well as a realism for what it will take to do that over an extended time. Because oftentimes we can find ourselves in a hero mode and not realize before it's too late that we are out of the game. We're out of the ability to try to affect change in our micro ecosystem, if that's even just in our household, right? Or to grow into some more ambitious, even articulation once you've kind of tackled and you've gotten almost addicted to the abundance of pursuing that purpose. Then you have to really be willing to draw boundaries around your ambitions too.
Yeah, I think it's so important to stress that we need to find that balance between trying to, do good in the world, trying to live with empathy and also have that empathy for ourselves and not burn ourselves out. Because if we're burnt out, then we can't do anything for anyone, including ourselves.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, Michael, I don't want to take up too much of your very important time, but I wanted to ask you the three final questions. I'll start with the first one, which is, what are you currently working on these days?
I am working on, I've taken a month of space to work on storytelling where I do a better job of letting people know how versatile the Actually Curious conversation game is at supporting empathy building in light and fun and public and group settings, all the way through to really tactical applications around healing and growth. It's been a while after writing the book that I just haven't. I'm realizing that there's so many fun ways to work with this modular conversation game to build connection in romantic partnerships or even with ourselves to find those areas of confrontation or growth that I really want to have fun with storytelling, specifically around the Actually Curious conversation game.
That sounds like fun. And where can people find you if they're looking to, learn more about what you do?
Yeah, you can always find us at curiositylab.io, where you'll be directed to all of the products that we've made to make empathy easy to learn and teach, including our course, The 5 Phases of Empathy, including our values tool, valuesexercise.com, and of course, my book, The Power of Empathy, and the game Actually Curious.
Wonderful. And to end, I'd love to hear a call to action from you, something that our listener could either consider, think about, or even put into action.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to offer an invitation that any area that you've thought of as Marcia and I have been speaking, where you have a block, whether that may be an interpersonal interaction or maybe a dream or an ambition or just a phobia that you've had, that you would like to use the power of empathy to confront and move through, then I want to offer an invitation to enter that journey. Write that thing down and either get the book, The Power of Empathy, or try my course, 5phasesofempathy.com, but use it strategically as a growth coach to help you overcome that emotional challenge that you've identified. And then share it with someone.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, Michael Tennant, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. And I hope that more people can be sort of awakened to the importance of empathy for their personal and for those around you, for oneself and the world.
Awesome. Yeah. And the many, many great abundant benefits as well.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thank you for listening. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com, where you'll learn about upcoming online events as well. Also, we love getting referrals from our listeners about future podcast guests. So please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com.